For those visitors, I want to welcome you to Centerpointe. I hope you enjoyed the breakfast. I hope you, take a nap if you need to, I suppose. I totally understand. Our people do it all the time, so don't feel bad about it. I see you guys out there. I was just talking to somebody this week, and they were saying, she's a gal goes to a church. Anyway, neither here nor there, but she was saying how she's so disappointed. It feels like it seems like you can either have a deep Bible study, spiritual message, or you can have a popular message, she said. You can either be deep, or you can be kind of shallow and have a message for everybody, or you can be deep and have just a message for a few people. She says, isn't that sad? And I was thinking, well, yeah, I guess that does sound sad, but is that the case? I really hope that's not the case. I really hope that's not true, and I don't think it is. I think you can have a deep message that tackles real issues and not, have a snooze fest. At least that's what I hope. That's what I pray. I want to do my best to tackle real tough subjects here. I don't want church to be a place where you come and feel coddled a little bit, where you come and I read off a couple nice messages I saw on Facebook or something to help you, warm your day up or whatever. Life is tough, and sometimes we have to deal with these things. Often, we have to deal with them all the time. I want to be real here in this church. This message is the messages that we give is not just for here. It's not just for your Sunday morning ritual. This is for your home. Jesus isn't just something you come and hear about on Sunday. He should be affecting your work, your home life, your relationships, everything that's going on. We don't want to play a game here. We want to deal with the truth. We want to hear the truth. We want to hear from God. That's why we're here. We're here to worship God and to hear a word from them. Or from him, from him. I don't want you to think it's for some kind of weird church. There's just one. One God. Each week I pray, Lord, let my words be forgotten and let your words be remembered. I'm just a guy, Lord. Please let my words be forgotten. Let your words be remembered. So if you wonder why, you leave church or you're thinking throughout the week, what was that sermon about? I can't remember. You ever do that? What was that sermon about? Well, that's why. I prayed that my words would be forgotten and his words would be remembered. So I pray that God would be speaking his words to you, not my words to you. And sometimes they're tough words. I say all this to say that this week's sermon is going to be tough. I know we got a lot of people here, a lot of visitors here, and maybe I should have gave a nice little message to kind of entertain everybody. But no, it's going to be a tough one. So no such luck for you guys today. We're going through Hebrews chapter 12 as a church, and this is the last week we'll be going through Hebrews. We're finishing up here. And Pastor Ralph led us through chapter 11 last week, and it's the chapter of faith. He goes and talks about all the people that have gone before us, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, all these people who lived by faith and who God proved himself to be faithful to. He talked about how faith isn't a blind thing. It's not a blind faith. We're not called to blind faith. Just have faith in whatever. Blind faith is no good. We're not interested in blind faith. Anybody can have blind faith. Faith, like Pastor Ralph says, is putting your trust in something or someone who's proven themselves faithful. And the whole point of Hebrews chapter 11 last week was, look at all of the people that have come before who God proved himself to be faithful to. Now let that strengthen you. Put your faith in him, not blind faith. Anybody, like I say, can have blind faith. Like you have blind faith like in the Lions. There's no proof, there's no evidence here that anything's going to happen. And yet we have blind faith. Okay, that's great. You can have that. But with God, God's not asking you just trust blindly. No, God says, I have proven myself, and I will prove it to you. Put your trust in me. We start in chapter 12 with something that's not in your bulletin, but this is leading up to the verses that we're reading. And he comes off of talking about all these people that have gone before in faith, and he says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles us, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. We're surrounded by this cloud of witnesses. This is a famous verse for Christians. If you've been around church or whatever, you know about this verse. And sometimes we misinterpret it. We think the cloud of witnesses is all these people looking down at us and kind of saying, come on, go get it. They're witnessing us. But it seems to me that these people who Pastor Ralph talked about last week aren't witnessing us. We're to be witnessing them. That they're witnessing to us. If you're a witness to something, you're telling somebody about it. If like the Jehovah's Witnesses, they go out and they witness to people. That's what the word witness mean. Hebrews chapter 11 is this hall of faith, everyone that's come before, and we see them, and it should strengthen our faith for the race that we're in. He uses this imagery, this race. He says, let us run with perseverance the race that's marked out for us. I was in track in high school, and I didn't enjoy track. I didn't mind track if it was like the 100 meter or the 200 meter. 200 is pushing it, but 100, 200. If I have to go a marathon or like a mile, forget it. I can't do it. I can't stand it. I could do it if I cared enough to do it. But I remember I would do the short distance runs, and my coach would be so frustrated with me. He said, "Why don't you try the 400?" I said, "No, 400, you got to pace yourself. I'm just in all or nothing. You give me all out, and then at the end of 200, then I collapse. There's nothing more there." And he would be so frustrated with me, the coach, that I remember this one time during practice, we would run laps around this track just to practice. And he says, and I would, after the first lap, I would just be like, I'm exhausted because I didn't pace myself. I didn't do anything. I just expended it all on the first run. And he kept this there. This one week, he kept everyone there. He said, no one's leaving until Chad runs a lap in under so many seconds. And I was like, but you've already had us run 5 or 6. He goes, nobody's leaving until Chad does it. And then everyone's like, Chad, come on. And so I tried to do it. Did I do it this lap? No, I didn't do it. I tried again. I'm trying. It's so hard to run. And finally, I did it. And he goes, okay, Chad did it. Everybody was excited. Yes, we can go home. And I went over and I threw up. And I said, the track is not for me. This race that we're called to run, that we're in a race. The writer says, let us run with perseverance this race that we're in. Here's some good advice to you today. If you get this, just get this before you go to sleep. You are not in a sprint, you're in a marathon, okay? The race that you're running is a marathon, not a sprint. A sprint, you got to do it all perfectly, and if you mess up one little thing, you're over. But you're not in a sprint. You don't have to worry about that. Things can go wrong in your life. It's fine. You're in a marathon, okay? You got plenty of other opportunities to make things up. If things aren't perfect right now, it's okay. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon. And we need to be thinking long term. We need to be thinking the whole picture, the big picture. And so the writer says, throw off everything that distracts you from this big picture. Throw off the sin that distracts you. And this is how sin works. We don't think about sin that way. We think of sin of those rules that we're not supposed to do. But the writer of Hebrews says, sin is the stuff that easily entangles you and distracts you from what you're doing. I remember one time, there's another evidence that I was not cut out for track, apparently. We were having a track meet at the end of school. And during school, I think near the end of school, one of the classes I was in, it was a speech class. I didn't do well in speech class in high school, but that's another story. In speech class, we had a pizza party, and they ordered way too much pizza, and me just being, I didn't have the big picture in mind. I didn't have the track meet in mind. I just ate as much pizza as I could. I think I ate almost a whole pizza all by myself. And somebody said, "Don't you have a track meet tonight?" I said, "Yeah, but I'm hungry. I'll take care. Track will be fine." And what happens when you run a track with a whole large pepperoni pizza in your belly is not pretty. It's not good. I didn't win that track meet. And in fact, I had a cramp that lasted 2 weeks. I had a cramp, and it wouldn't go away. It was painful, miserable. This is how sin works. Sin gets your eyes off of the race and puts your eyes on the pizza. It puts your eyes on the instant gratification and makes you forget that you're in a race and that there's a big picture going on. This is what sin does. And when you focus not on the race but on this instant gratification stuff, then bad things happen. You throw up. You get a cramp. Things happen in your life. Then you say, and eventually what happens when you get too distracted from the race, you start saying like I did, you know what, I hate track anyway. I don't want to do this anyway. And you forget that you're in a race and that there's a goal and God has a goal for you. But sin, it's not as if most people don't make this big decision to say, you know what, I'm done with God. I've had it. I'm sick of it. I renounce the Lord. Most people don't do that. For most people, it's the sin that easily distracts. It's the thing that comes in day after day that you don't realize, and time after time, and before you know it, you've made 1,000 decisions without God, and before you know it, you've been going without God for so long, you think, it doesn't matter anyway. And you know what? Every time I think about God, I think He's mad at me, and you know what? Forget it. And I don't even like running anyway. I don't even like this race anyway. That's how sin works. That's normally how it works. You just wake up one day and you've forgotten about it. You wake up one day and you've forgotten about God. Or you wake up and you say, you know what? I'm too far gone. I've been distracted for so long. I've eaten so much pizza. There's no possible way that I can get back on track. That's how sin works. The good news is neither one of those things is true. There's no forgetting about the race, and please hear this, there's no getting too far away from God. God, as one poet called him, is the hound of heaven, who's always after you, who's always ready to take you back. But don't fall into sin. Don't get distracted by it. The message that the writer of Hebrews says is throw off everything that distracts you from the goal. Keep your eye fixed on the goal. Anything that's any delicious pepperoni pizza that comes your way, cast your eyes off it and keep focused on the goal. If you're going to run with a purpose, you're going to need to focus on the goal because the race is hard and there's all sorts of distractions out there. The race that we're in is hard. You don't get to choose whether you're in a race or not. You're in it. What you get to choose is how distracted you'll be. How are you going to focus on the goal that God has for you, or are you just going to race while eating a piece of pizza in one hand and get a cramp? I'm done with that imagery, so we'll move on now. The verses that are in your insert, all this is by way of introduction to help us understand the verses that we have here. This is Hebrews chapter 12, 7 through 11. And these are the tough verses to my mind. I'm just going to read them for you. We're going to read them together. He says this in verse 7. Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as His children. For what children are not disciplined by their father? If you're not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you are not legitimate, not true sons and daughters at all. Moreover, we have all had human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of spirits and live? They, meaning our fathers, disciplined us for a little while as they thought best, but God disciplines us for our good, in order that we may share in His holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. That's tough stuff. We don't want to think about that. We don't want to think about discipline. We don't want to think about enduring hardship. But in these verses, there's something important that I hope we don't miss. Because in these verses, the writer tells us the goal that we're supposed to be focused on. The writer tells us the goal that God is trying to get you to. And he says it in verse 10. He says, God disciplines us for our good, in order that we may share in His holiness. This is the reason we have hardship. This is the reason God disciplines us. This is the goal that God is trying to bring us to. That is, so that we may share in His holiness. Holiness is the goal. And it's an interesting goal, I think. It's not heaven. We tend to think of goal as heaven. Get me to heaven. Forget everything else. I just want to get to heaven. Or we think the goal is blessings. Well, the writer of Hebrews says, the goal isn't heaven. The goal isn't blessings. The goal isn't your happiness and comfort. The goal isn't a nice, easy life with a retirement at the end of a well-lived life. The goal is holiness. This is my goal for you. Our goals are all those things. Our goals are the blessings and the retirement and the peace and the comfort and all that stuff. God's goals is holiness. And people get that mixed up. We tend to think, well, God wants to help me fulfill my goals. Well, maybe if they line up with His, but God's goal for you is holiness. And holiness, just very quickly, is a deep subject. But I don't want you to think holiness is something like the old church lady from Saturday Night Live, where you're just mad about everything and you don't like anything or anybody, and everything is just the work of Satan. Holiness is being, very simply, more like Christ. Holiness is being more like Christ. Jesus, the ultimate Holy One, is our goal, and God is wanting to make us more like Christ. That's a simple definition of what holiness is. But who wants holiness, though? I mean, seriously, we want to be honest here. We don't, if we're being honest with ourselves, we don't want to be like Christ. At least our flesh doesn't want to be like Christ. But because Christ had it tough. It's tough to be Christ, isn't it? It's tough to be just forgiving to everyone and merciful to everyone and gracious to everyone. It's tough, obviously, to look at the life of Christ, and especially when we see the cross and say, yeah, I want to be like that. We would much rather say, God, why don't you do it for us? I'll let you be Christ, and I'll be thankful. But you know what? I don't really want to be like Christ because that's tough. But what God really wants for you is to make you more like him. If you say, God, I just want you to do your thing. Well, what God wants to do is make you more like him, make you more holy. And what we need to do is make our goal his goal. We need to make our goal holiness. Holiness, though, comes by discipline. This is the tough part. Holiness comes by discipline. As the writer of Hebrews says, endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as children. He wants to build you towards something. Now, this is important to remember, though, that discipline is not punishment. Maybe your dad was bad at discipline. Maybe you're bad at discipline, and it's more like a punishment. That's not how God's discipline works. The writer of Hebrews didn't say you're being punished by God. These hardships that you go through, these trials, these difficulties, these are God's punishments. No. He uses the word discipline. Verse 7, he says, endure hardship as discipline. This is not God punishing. We tend to think that. Something bad happens, and we say, well, what do we do to deserve this? Is there something in my life I have to change because God is up there and he's mad at me and say, you went wrong, whop. No, it's not punishment. When it says endure hardship as discipline, what he's saying is God is turning every hardship that comes your way toward your good, toward your holiness. And this is what we need to remember, that God isn't the one smiting you with these terrible things, but he's taking all these tragedies, all the hardship, and God can use them for your good. That's the power of God. And we need to see hardship like this. When we experience hardship, this is the message this week. Endure it as discipline. Endure the hardships that you come through as a way that God's bringing you more toward his goal. And he points out, if you are disciplined, then that means you're loved as children of God. It's like my kids. Well, I don't discipline your kids. I see your kids and they're crazy and they're nuts, and I say, oh, okay, it's not my problem though. I'm not going to discipline them. I look at them and I say, well, I'm glad that's not my kid. It's not true. Well, maybe it's true for some of you. I'll let you guess which kids it's true for. I'm just kidding. But I do discipline my own kids. I see my own kids acting nuts. Yeah, okay, now there's some discipline coming. My kids act nuts, and then I say, okay, things are going to change. We're going to change this. And I do it like the writer says, the way I think best. But what does this tell you? I don't discipline your kids, but I do discipline my kids. Why? Because I guess I care more about my kids than you. But no, I'm in a relationship with my kids. I love them, and I want to build them up. So what does this tell you that God disciplines you? Not that God's mad at you, but that God cares too much about you to leave you alone. He's not going to just sit there and see you act up and say, ooh, well, it's not my kid. I'm glad that's not my kid. No, he cares too much about you for that. Now, verse 11 is very honest, the last verse we read here. And that's what I love about the Bible. That's what I love about the Scriptures. It's honest. It doesn't sugarcoat anything. Verse 11 basically says it stinks. He knows it stinks. I know it stinks. Hardship. No one's saying to just be happy and put on a fake smile and say, oh, my life is so wonderful. He says, no discipline is pleasant at the time. It's painful. But later on, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. We don't need to fool ourselves into thinking it's pleasant. Oh, I love it. I love all these hardships. I know God's working in my life. If you're at that point, that's great, but we're not called to do that. He says it's painful, isn't it? When we go through hardships, when we hear about a sickness or a death, or we get bad news about our job, we don't put on a fake smile and say, oh, this is so wonderful. No, it's painful, isn't it? We're not called to put on this fake smile. The writer of Hebrews says we're called to endure the hardship. Sickness, loss of job, depression, loneliness, these aren't good things. These are tragedies, but God can use all tragedies. That's the good news. In fact, these tragedies are when God does his most meaningful and his biggest work in our lives. And the good news is, if you endure it as discipline, the writer of Hebrews says, then you're trained by it. It produces a harvest of righteousness. He says, for those who are trained by it, this is what happens. And I know many of us think a lot of times, I wish God would just leave me alone. You know, if this is the case, wouldn't it be better if God just left us alone? We read these words, endure hardship, as if it's coming from a loving father. That just sounds bad. You know, I don't want that. How about God just lay off, okay? Just leave me alone for a little bit. What I think would be truly terrible, though, is if God really did leave you alone. I think that would be the truly terrible thing. What would be truly terrible is to experience all those hardships and all those tragedies, and God didn't care at all. That would be the truly terrible thing. To go through suffering and hardship pointlessly, without any purpose or meaning behind it, that's the terrible thing. You're going to experience hardship either way. You're going to experience tragedy either way. You don't get a choice about tragedy. Like I said, you don't get a choice about being in the race. Tragedy happens. You're either going to go to someone's funeral or someone's going to go to your funeral. That's how life works. Here's what you do have a choice about, though. You can ask yourself, am I going to endure this and let God give it purpose? Or is this just going to be meaningless? Or am I going to try to just deal with this myself and keep focused on my own goals? Then the tragedies happen still, but now they're pointless. Now they're meaningless because you don't have the power to turn them around. There's only one who has the power to turn them around, and he says, give up your goals to me, and I will take everything that happens to you and make it for your good. Isn't that good news? When we cling to our own goal, when we don't surrender to God, all those things you've gone through are just terrible things that happen to you. God has the power to turn them into our glory, and he promises that he will. If you focus on the goal, if you focus on his goals, not yours. This is the picture of God, not the angry God who smites people and is mad and wants you to get back on track. He says, give me your goals, and I will turn all these things towards your holiness. Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 19 is a great verse. It's the Israelites, just as they're about to enter the promised land. God's laid down all these rules. He said, I'm bringing you into this land. And he says, today I've given you the choice between life and death, between blessings and curses. Oh, that you would choose life. I'm laying this choice out for you. Please choose life. Please choose me. Please choose blessing. Don't go through this life without me. Don't go through these tragedies without me. Don't try to do it on your own power. Don't try to run this race stumbling all over the place and trying to make your own good out of it. Just turn to me, and I can turn all things towards your good. Many of us know what hardship is. Maybe you're saying today, it's too much. Honestly, it's too much. I can't take it. I can't stand up under it. You're not supposed to stand up under it. God's not trying to see how much you can take. You're not supposed to stand up under it and say, yes, I can take even this, Lord. We're called to stop clinging to our own goals, stop clinging to ourselves, and focus instead on God. We're called to lay down in front of God and in the face of these, in the hardships and the tragedies. Fighting against God's goals is what is really frustrating. Then every hardship that comes your way, not only is it pointless, but it's a distraction. if you're focused on your goal of comfort and happiness instead of God's goal of holiness for you, if you're focused on that, then it is a distraction. Everything that comes your way that's something bad, then you say, this is another distraction. It distracts me from my goal of holiness or of happiness, of comfort. When we have this focus, we become miserable. You think it's good. You think it's like, I want happiness, I want comfort. But when you make that your goal, then everything bad that happens to you is a distraction. And it's terrible, and it's a tragedy. You say, this isn't part of my plan. This isn't part of my plan. This isn't part of my plan. When you shift your goal to holiness, though, then everything is a part of God's plan. And it can be used for your benefit. But you have to have God's goal as your goal. Not the happiness and the comfort that we want as our goal. The holiness that God wants as his goal. With God in charge, you don't have to be distracted or worried about what comes your way, because God can use all things for your benefit. That's his promise. That's not my promise. God can use all things for your benefit. And we hear this message, a message like this, and we tend to think, okay, good, I like that part. I like the part about my benefit. That's what I want. So what do I have to do? God, here's my tragedy. Here's the bad things that have happened. Now give me my blessing, okay? Now give me the benefit part. I want the benefit part. Let me tell you a quick story that just happened to me. We were on our way we were visiting some family, and we brought our little dog with us. We've got this little dog. It's I call it a little three-legged dog. It's got one little leg that doesn't work. It just kind of hangs there. And we went to a rest stop and let her out. She had to do her business. And we're going out there, and because she has three legs, she kind of moves funny. It's kind of a little bit comical. But it triggers a sense in other dogs that this is some kind of injured, like a rabbit or something. And it triggers this attack instinct on other dogs. So whenever we take her out and there's other dogs around, we always got to be really careful. Even if it's a nice dog, there's something that clicks in a dog's brain that says, I got to kill that thing. And now I'm letting my dog out, and somebody had let their dog, this big old dog, off the leash, and it was just running around in this rest area. And so as the dog is doing her business, I noticed this other dog coming and running all over the place. I said, okay, we got to get out of here. So I pick up the dog, and I run back into the car. And luckily, she'd already done her business, so we're all set. So we get back on the road, and I'm sitting there, I was in the passenger seat, and I smell something terrible. And I'm smelling, and I go, man. And I didn't want to say anything. You don't want to. I was with the in-laws. You don't want to say, like, what's going on here? But after a couple minutes, it was just so obnoxious, I thought. So I said, hey, to my father-in-law, hey, is that, I go, you all right? Is there something smells terrible? And it's not going away. It's not like we passed a manure field. I mean, it's still here. And he says, yeah, I don't want to say anything either, but something smells awful. So I turned back to my wife, and hey, is that you? What is that? And then everybody in the car is like, yeah, we all smell it. What is this? It's a horrible smell. And we're all trying to figure out what it is. And I go, man, it's right down here. I go, it's right here by the floor here. And I looked at my shoe, and I had stepped in just I don't know if somebody had an elephant that they were letting out at the rest area. I had this big, disgusting mess on my shoe. And I said to everyone, okay, well, guys, it's me. I go, in my haste to get the dog in the car, I must have stepped in the mother of all, whatever it is. And so we had to pull off. It was atrocious. I don't know what they were feeding this dog, but we had to pull off and to wash off, and it was like I won't describe it to you. Well, why do I tell this story? I tell this story because, when we have these tragedies, we have these things, and we say, God, I want my blessing now. Here's my tragedy now. I want my blessing. Here's this terrible thing that's happened to me, God. Now I need you to make it good. Now give me whatever I get, when I give it to you. Well, I tell this story because maybe it's you who stinks. Maybe it's you who needs changing in this situation, these tragedies that happen. And here's the thing. If God's goal for us is to be more like Jesus, then I can pretty much guarantee you that it's you who needs to be changing. If it's God's goal for you to be more like Christ, then you're not there yet. You're the one who stinks. And we need to endure these things knowing that, you know what? It's not just my circumstances that need to change. You know what? It's not just my bank account that needs more money. It's also in my heart that needs changing. I'm the one who stings. Please don't hear the message of the televangelist today. Please don't hear, give a little money and God will give you more money. That's just God. That's just God fulfilling your own blessings and your own goals. God's goal for you is different than that. God's goal is to make you more like Jesus. God's not interested in giving you more money. He talks about how money's a problem throughout the whole Bible. He's interested in making you more like Jesus. He's interested in giving you holiness. When we look at Jesus, even, when we look at his life, we don't see a promise of material blessing. When we look at Jesus, we see a big, ugly cross. And the cross is a tragedy. The cross is messy and ugly. We have it polished up and it looks nice, but the cross is messy and it's painful. Life is messy and it's painful and it's ugly. When God makes us more like himself, he's not trying to make you rich. That's not the promise I'm talking about. Sometimes when God makes us more like himself, sometimes it looks like an ugly cross. Sometimes it looks like a mess. But we can't forget the other side of the cross. The cross shows us that, yes, we endure these tragedies, but the empty tomb shows us that even the very worst thing you can go through can be made beautiful by God. We look at the cross and we see how ugly it is, but then we remember, you know what? But God makes the most ugliest things, the most meaningless, pointless tragedies into his glory, and he can transform them and make them beautiful. We were at I'm finishing up here. We're at a art museum, like an art exhibit. I'm not the biggest artsy guy, but I'm walking through this art exhibit, and I come into this room and there's like trash everywhere. It's like one of the art exhibits, and I think, okay, well, this is new art or something. I don't know. I guess people can appreciate this, and I'm looking at it, kind of thinking, well, art is so silly. I can't believe people come to this and look at this pile of trash and call it art, and it really was. There's just trash everywhere, and it's in the corner of this room here. On the other side of the room, there was this little window, like a little black frame, and you look through this window. It's a small window, about this. It's like a viewport. You look through this little viewing thing, and there's nothing on the other side of it. It's like, well, what is this just empty viewing thing here? And you walk all the way to the other side of the room, and you look in this viewport, and the artist had arranged the trash in such a way that it's trash to everyone who comes into this room, but when you look through this viewport, it becomes this portrait. It becomes like all the trash lines up, and you see from this angle, it's a portrait. It's a masterpiece. And I thought, well, okay, I can appreciate that. That's really cool. Your life might look like a disaster right now. You may look across your life and see all sorts of tragedy and disaster and sickness and loss of job and depression and loneliness. And you see all these things and you think to yourself, this is terrible. This is not my goal for my life. There are all these things that have happened to you that you have no power to make better, no power to change. But when you choose God as your goal, one day you're going to see him face to face, and he's going to bring you to this little window, and you're going to look out at your life and all of the things that have happened to you, and God says, but here's my window, and you look through it, and you see God's made a masterpiece. You'll see from God's point of view, and you will be God's masterpiece. That's his goal for you. Despite the tragedy, God says, I can use all that stuff. The worse the tragedy, the more beautiful you're going to be. But you have to make God your goal today. You have to have that little viewport as your goal, not your own. Let's pray to him.